Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mara Rudman, the Executive Vice President for Policy here at the Center for American Progress Action Fund. We really appreciate your joining us on this second day of the Democratic National Convention. Before we get started, just a quick piece of housekeeping to say that live captioning for today's event is available at americanprogressaction.org/live captioning. We have a tremendous keynote speaker and a great panel today. I'll introduce them shortly, but first I want to offer just a little bit of context for our discussion. Since March, the United States has witnessed the most devastating economic turndown in living memory. Tens of millions of Americans have lost their jobs. Businesses have shuttered. Education, public health, caregiving, manufacturing, all have been heavily impacted, along with other service industries. Americans across the country are hurting in rural and urban areas and progressive and conservative strongholds. This pandemic also has had a disparate and devastating impact on people of color. It requires an unprecedented economic rebuild and recovery for an incoming administration. But the challenges are not insurmountable. With the right plan, strong leadership, and strategies, there's a path to build America back better. It starts with asking some key questions, and we'll look to dive into some of those here today. But before we start tackling these key areas with our amazing panel, it's my great honor to share with you a message that Secretary Castro recorded earlier for us. Secretary Castro has long called for rewriting America's social contract. He has advocated, among other things, for universal childcare, for a minimum wage of $15 per hour, 7 paid sick leaves per year, and 12 weeks paid family and medical leave per year. He has emphasized the need to invest in working class families, to push back against widening inequality, and to ensure that all Americans have the means to succeed in this country. I want to thank Secretary Castro for speaking with us. Over to you, Mr. Secretary.
Good afternoon, everybody, and hello from San Antonio, Texas. I hope that you're staying healthy and doing well wherever you are. I want to say a huge thank you to Neera Tandon and all of the staff over at CAP for the fantastic job that they've done pulling this event together, and most importantly for all of the wonderful, impactful work that the Center for American Progress does day in and day out to make sure that the best progressive ideas make it into policy in Congress and the administration. I know that was the case during the Obama administration, and I think I have a feeling that it's going to be the case again in the next administration. You know, a couple months back at the beginning of the pandemic, there was an image out of San Antonio, my hometown, and where I'm speaking to you from now, that went viral. It was a photograph from overhead of a sea of cars in a parking lot that were waiting for people to pick up bags of groceries from the San Antonio Food Bank. It was a parking lot of a flea market that the San Antonio Food Bank had set up at as a mobile station to deliver food to needy families. And one of the things that was revealed after the photo went viral was that on a weekly basis, the San Antonio Food Bank was serving 120,000 families. And that got a lot of attention because it drove home the tremendous need that exists right now in our country due to the pandemic, whether it comes to food or assistance with other needs. But what got less attention was maybe the most important part, that every week, in a normal week before the pandemic, the San Antonio Food Bank was serving 60,000 families. In the same way, today we're facing an evictions crisis. Up to 30 million people, by one estimate, could face potential eviction by the end of October. But before this pandemic, we were already dealing with a rental affordability crisis in our country, with rents spiking in communities throughout this nation. More than 40% of Americans rent burden, meaning they're paying more than a third of their income on a monthly basis in rent and associated housing costs. And just yesterday, my kids started virtual kindergarten and virtual sixth grade. And it drove home to me the fact that well before this pandemic, we already had a digital divide that too oftentimes means the most vulnerable children, especially children from communities of color and of course low-income families, don't have the tools they need to truly prosper in the 21st century. Something as basic and simple and necessary these days as broadband access at home. And so as we think about picking up the pieces after this pandemic, as we think about the road ahead, we have to think not only about what an economy that works means for right now, and everybody, especially the most vulnerable who have been the hardest hit, but most importantly, how do we address this for the long term? How do we get rid of that digital divide? How do we see housing as a human right and make tremendous investments in more housing that's affordable throughout this country so that hopefully one day everyone will have a safe, decent, affordable place to live? And how do we ensure that in this, the wealthiest nation on earth, not only does everybody have health care, but also that people do not go hungry? That all of those families who rely on the food bank every week in whichever local community you're in don't have to do that. We can make investments in our economy, in our society, to ensure that no matter who you are, that you're able to prosper. And y'all have a fantastic lineup today of people with excellent experience in broadening opportunity, folks who understand the steps that we need to take, whether we're talking about housing, we're talking about putting people back to work, investing in small business, investing in healthcare opportunity, to ensure that we can bring about that kind of country in the years to come. And what an exciting opportunity and necessary conversation this is. A lot of people are hurting out there. So many Americans are facing eviction. So many Americans are still out of work. More Americans are going hungry right now. And so this is a conversation that is necessary. It's also, I think, if I know CAP's track record, I think it's a conversation that is going to help produce results and make a difference ultimately in people's lives. And so I want to thank you, Neera, and your staff for putting this together and giving me the opportunity to just say a few remarks. I want to thank each and every one of the participants for adding their thoughts, their ideas. I hope it's a time for us to exchange those ideas, to engage in thinking about what can be done, hopefully in a new administration, in the months to come, the years to come, and also to resolve perhaps once more why we engage in all of this in the first place. Because we know that we can help make opportunity and a better life possible through our work. Let's go do that. Thanks a lot, Cap. Good luck with the conference.
Thank you very much, Secretary Castro, for those thought-provoking comments. Really appreciate your taking the time to speak to us today, and look forward to, on our panel, being able to unpack further some of your comments and commentary. So with that, let's turn to our panelists. I will keep introductions brief, but I do want to give a sense of how fortunate we are to have this group of people focusing on rebuilding and recovery here with us today. Congressman Don Beyer represents Virginia's 8th District. He serves on the House Committee on Ways and Means and Science, Space and Technology, and the Science, Space and Technology Committee. He also co-chairs the New Democrat Coalition's Climate Change Task Force. And among other positions, Congressman Beyer previously served as Lieutenant Governor of Virginia and Ambassador to Switzerland. I think we have some feedback. Just remind everyone to mute on our panel. Thanks. Mayor Lori Lightfoot is Chicago's mayor, taking office in May 2019. She has been a powerful progressive figure in addressing the city's challenges in the wake of this pandemic and is a leader in the fight against racial inequality. In her current and previous roles, she has worked hard to address inclusivity and ethical governance in Chicago. And Mirza Baradon, who maybe is not visible right now, but we're working to get on the panel, is a professor of law at UC Irvine School of Law. She is an authority on banking law and is a prize-winning author. She also happens to serve on CAP's National Advisory Board to eliminate the Black-White Wealth Gap. Steve Kreisberg is an economist and director of research and collective bargaining with the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, or the AFSCME, as it's more popularly known, the largest union of public employees in the United States. And Jake Sullivan is a current senior advisor in the Biden campaign. Among other positions, he has served as a national security advisor to Vice President Biden and Deputy Chief of Staff and Director of Policy Planning at the Department of State under Secretary Clinton. Welcome to all of you. So glad to have you all taking the time to be with us here today. Mayor, if I might start with you. The local economies of cities across the country have been devastated by this pandemic. Chicago quickly assembled a task force to explore economic recovery. And last month, your task force released a recovery plan, Forward Together, Building a Stronger Chicago. Can you share with us a little bit about the key proposals in the plan and describe some of the challenges you anticipate with regard to it and how you are thinking about meeting those challenges?
Yes, and thank you very much for having me today. One of the things that we were focused on when we assembled this team of folks in the task force was to not only just focus on business, but to really understand the impacts of COVID-19 across a lot of different sectors in our city. Certainly our business sector, but going way beyond that to look at our neighborhoods, look at our not-for-profit sector, our healthcare systems. We wanted to really understand what was going to be necessary for us to build a foundation for the future. So what we have done, there are a range of different recommendations that were based upon industry groups, and they range everything from making sure that we have the most healing and trauma-centered city in the country. COVID-19, I think it's really exposed a lot of vulnerabilities in cities like Chicago all across the country, one of them being the need to make sure that we are servicing the needs of our people from trauma to serious mental illness and building up community-based structures to do that. Of course, we looked at business, and there we're leaning into areas of our strength, from our transportation logistics strength, our life sciences industry, our hospitality sector, and more. We're looking to build on what has made Chicago great, including our manufacturing sector, not only to strengthen local businesses, but to make sure that we're looking at creating new markets and new opportunities for our local business, and also focusing on our small businesses, which have really been hit very, very hard by the impacts of COVID-19 and the resulting economic fallout. We want to make sure that our small businesses can thrive. That's why overall, we have put together about $130 million in support for our small businesses in a combination of short-term loans, but also grants that help strengthen our small businesses to keep them thriving, to keep their employees employed, and really build strength and vitality in our neighborhoods. But those are some of the top line recommendations of our task force that we are hard at work in implementing.
Thanks. Appreciate hearing about a lot that you have on your plate and impressive ways of going forward with it. Congressman Beyer, I wonder if I might turn to you. Can you offer us your take on where we are on the desperately needed relief funding negotiations? Certainly the House passed the $3 trillion HEROES Act more than 2 months ago. We don't seem to see much from the Senate or the White House at this point. Where do you think this is leading, and do you think we'll have any action prior to a new administration coming in?
Mara, I desperately hope so and pray so. I don't know that I can give you much encouragement. We're going to come back Saturday and in the House pass a bill to basically restore the post office to where it was on January 1st. But it's not clear that that will be taken up in the Senate or signed by the president. My one reason for optimism is that by the Senate Republicans and the White House ignoring the people who've been so badly hurt by this, there's a huge political cost to pay that ultimately they should not be willing to pay. I just look at Mayor Lightfoot. You know, our state and local governments are going to be $550 billion short this fiscal year and another $450 next year. The reason it's called the HEROES Act is because that's the money used to pay all the people that keep our communities safe and wholesome, police, teachers, firefighters, and on and on. And then we look at this silly refusal to continue unemployment benefits. You know, we're somewhere north of 20 million, maybe if you truly count 30 million people unemployed. Not only has the $600 stopped, but many of them are getting to the end of the 26 weeks that they had for their own states. And they will then go from $800–900 to nothing. You know, because we were able to put so much money into the economy through the CARES Act, we kept an awful lot of people out of poverty. But that is not going to be sustained in the weeks to come unless we act. You know, Nancy Pelosi has been, I think, terrific in saying, we will compromise. She started off giving away half of what we wanted, from 3 million down to 2 trillion, 3 trillion to 2 trillion, and still no reaction. I think it's incredibly short-sighted and immoral not to be working with us to get something done.
Thank you. Challenging, certainly a challenging situation, but thank you for laying that out. Steve, I wonder, following up on the points that Congressman Beyer has made about the the importance of state and local assistance, and also obviously echoing the mayor on this. You've obviously worked extensively with employees at the state and local level. Why and how, can you give us a little bit more granularity sense of the importance of the types of robust federal assistance to states and localities that for services that people need, amplifying a little bit more what the Congressman had to say, given all the work that you've done with those communities?
Sure, and I think the Congressman has laid it out very well in terms of both the priorities and the impacts. So we're looking at about $1 trillion shortfall, and that's a big number, as we know. But it's not an exaggerated number, as the Congressman well knows. It's what's necessary. And outside of it being a big number, it does have impacts. We're in the middle of a pandemic, the biggest health crisis we've ever faced in our lifetimes, certainly as big as probably what's been known as the Spanish flu over 100 years ago. So we need increased services. Those are healthcare services that need to be provided. We're talking about new types of services within healthcare, such as contact tracing, that we haven't done in any kind of large-scale basis prior to this pandemic. But we also talk basic services like sanitation. We have to retrofit our schools. We know we want to open up schools. Everybody wants schools to open, but they want to open up those schools safely. So there's investments to do that, and that investment not only includes on the health side, but also on the physical infrastructure side. But the other piece of this is, and something that people lose sight of, is we've already lost about 1.5 million jobs in the public sector. That's a lot of jobs. We're going to lose more. But the spill-on effects or the multiplier effects from that are absolutely tremendous. Economists at the Economic Policy Institute have estimated that without this aid, the economy is going to lose 5.3 million jobs over the next 18 months. It's a lot of jobs. That's an outstanding number of jobs. And we need the aid to kind of fill in that economic hole. Now, the counter to that is folks believe we shouldn't be running deficits. But now is the time to run deficits. The best metaphor we can use is when the house is on fire, you don't start asking about the price of water. We need to put the fire out. And if we don't address the economic hole that we're in and the fiscal hole that we're in, and cities like the mayor's city are going to run deficits, they're going to have to lay off workers, not because the mayor wants to, but because the mayor has to. And those layoffs will lead to spill-on effects of more layoffs. One of the things we've learned from the Great Recession is we went into austerity in our public sector too quickly. And what it did is it prolonged the recession, and it meant that we did not have the robust job growth that we needed to get out of it quickly. And it took fully 8 years for us to recover. Right now, we cannot afford to do the same thing. So the stakes are very high, both in terms of services, but also in terms of the economic development of the nation.
Thanks, Steve. Jake, I wonder, following up on that, and before I go to a question to Jake, I just want to let everyone know that we do have Professor Baradon with us, even though we cannot see her. So I will be turning to her next, and very glad that she was able to join us. Jake, clearly the legislation that the House passed a couple months ago is critically important for the reasons that Steve and the congressman and the mayor had hinted at and had laid out in some detail as well for us. But can you talk us through why and how Vice President Biden's Build Back Better plan, which would follow from what we hope is the legislation to come sooner rather than later, but how that plan paves the path forward towards a real national economic recovery?
Sure. Thanks, Maura, and thanks to CAP for giving me this opportunity. And it's a real privilege to be on a panel with the mayor, the congressman, with Steve, and with the professor. I want to start just by really strongly reinforcing the vice president's support for the kind of state and local fiscal relief that is going to be necessary to sustain our communities, to keep people employed, to keep services running, and really as a foundation for the economic recovery agenda that he's put out. Steve very rightly points out that in 2009, there was state and local fiscal relief, but not enough. There should have been more. And had there been more, it could have helped drive the recovery even more quickly. And Vice President Biden, having gone through that, having led the Recovery Act, having played such a central role, recognizes that we're not just talking about dollars and cents here as statistics. We're talking about the teachers and the public health workers and the programs that keep people fed, that keep people healthy, and that keep communities healthy. So that's a really foundational point for him. And whatever happens this year, making sure that we're following through with that in 2021, if he's fortunate enough to be elected, will be a central part of his priority and his agenda. The vice president sees his responsibility as not just driving the relief side of this, as critical as it is to provide that relief, but also to drive a recovery where we don't just go back to the way things were before, but as he's put it, we build back better. And for him, that means 4 major sets of investments that not only will put people back to work and get a recovery going, but will help us solve 4 big national challenges. The first of those is major investments in manufacturing and technology to ensure that the future is made in America and in all of America, in all of our communities, not just in a few cities, not just on the coasts, but everywhere there is talent and entrepreneurship and a desire to invest in building things and inventing things here. The second is to tackle the existential crisis of climate change through major investments in infrastructure and clean energy that will ensure that we not just create millions of jobs and set a new foundation for growth, but we also lead the world in terms of the clean energy revolution and future. The third element is caregiving, that we invest in a 21st century caregiving and education workforce in this country, that we pay our caregivers the wage and benefits they deserve and give them the dignity and respect they deserve, and we ease the burden for families. And finally, that across all of these, we're advancing racial equity and trying to close the gaps in opportunity, in wealth, in education, in home ownership, and so much else. So it's a big, bold, ambitious agenda. I'm sorry to go on a little bit, but as you can tell, I'm pretty excited about it. We're pretty excited about it, and we're eager to work with mayors like Mayor Lightfoot and members of Congress like Representative Beyer on this as we go forward.
Thanks very much, Jake, and we'll look to follow up with some more questions on the plan, but really appreciate that layout. Professor, I hope that you are with us at this point, and if you are,
yes.
Great, terrific.
Yeah.
Terrific. And Professor Baradon, we introduced you as you were having your technical challenges and coming on, so just know we really very much appreciate that you've been able to join us. We know that many people have waited months for states to process unemployment insurance claims, among the issues that the panel has flagged here. During the first round of PPP loans, the vast majority of Black small businesses were denied. What actions do you think, Professor, that should be taken by the administration and by the federal government more broadly to ensure an equitable and sustainable economic recovery?
So yes, thank you. So first of all, thank you so much for having me. And I'm so sorry. I don't know what is going on. My computer is just absolutely denying any camera access. I think generally one of the things that is this crisis is revealing is some of the underlying problems that we've always had. So there's nothing new in the exclusion of Black businesses and Black communities from the financial system. What this crisis has exposed is even when we want to help small businesses and we use the same tracks that we use, which is the banking system, which is the monetary policy levers that we have, it usually funnels it to the already powerful businesses and the already included parts of our society. And it's in order to actually have inclusion and to get the funds to those who need it the most, we actually have to look very closely at the systems that we use to operate. So specifically the payment system. When we sent a $1,200 check to folks, some folks had to wait months or hours at an ATM to get their check. This is a problem that is a pre-existing problem. It's something that I've been working on for decades, and that the crisis exacerbated, but it's not a new problem. And so I think when we look at improvements, we have to look at both the fiscal funds, but also the operational access points. And I think that's something that excludes people, that it sort of goes undercover a lot of times.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And we certainly have all had these moments in our new normal of the technology not cooperating with our best laid plans. So appreciate you making the extra effort here. Jake, I wonder if I might come back to you for a little bit more on the economic and racial, how the Building Back Better plan deals with, looks at attacking some of these economic and racial inequity challenges that we're facing.
Sure. The fourth pillar, as I said, is an independent pillar, but also as a through line across all of the elements of the plan, is about advancing racial equity. And so the way that the vice president thinks about this is think about each of these major challenges. What are we going to do in terms of mobilizing public investment to help businesses throughout the supply chain, especially small businesses, grow jobs, grow market share? And he saw that over the years, there's been a major impediment, particularly for Black and Brown-owned small businesses, to get access to capital and credit, because small businesses tend to rely either on relationships with banks or money from families that a lot of Black and Brown entrepreneurs don't have. And so he's proposed a massive 20-fold increase in a successful program that the Obama-Biden administration started to provide both venture capital and low interest loans to Black and Brown owned businesses throughout the United States for them to be able to effectively either start or grow and then plug into many of the other investments he's making in procurement, in infrastructure, in technology. The second thing is that in the infrastructure and clean energy space, the vice president recognizes that the communities that have borne the brunt of air pollution and climate change in our country have tended to be lower income communities, many of them Black and Brown communities in both urban and rural areas. And so he has said that 40% of the benefits of the investments he is making in infrastructure and clean energy, and that's a $2 trillion investment that he's proposed, will go to those frontline and fence line communities, with a particular emphasis on the ones that have been the hardest hit over the past several decades. And then finally, the vice president recognizes that in the caregiving and education space, for our home health care workers, for our child care workers, so many of them are women of color, immigrant women, and that they have simply not been paid or respected the way that they deserve. And that so many families, Black and Brown families in this country, have to choose between paying for childcare and paying for rent or putting food on the table. And so his view of putting childcare and home health care at the center of his economic recovery plan is in substantial part about how to move forward an agenda that speaks to the daily needs of minority communities in the United States. Last thing that I will say on the racial wealth gap piece, the Vice President has a far-reaching home ownership plan that is all about trying to help families, and in particular Black and Brown families, be able to build that foundational source of wealth that for so many working families and middle-class people in this country, it's all about their home. It's about the value that they have in their home. And he has a very ambitious, aggressive tax credit proposal that actually the Senate has picked up in a bill introduced by Leader Schumer and a number of key senators, a $15,000 tax credit, because he recognizes that we have to attack the wealth gap head on. And one of the key ways to do that is through expanding access to home ownership.
Thanks, Jake. Comprehensive layout there. Really appreciate that. I wonder if I might turn to both Mayor Lightfoot and Professor Baradron in following up on the comments, Jake, that you made, particularly about the about childcare workers, childcare businesses, the caregiving industry. Obviously, many working parents rely on childcare and sometimes other aspects of the caregiving industry, as well as schools, to care for their children while they're at work. Given closures or limiting operating capacities that we're confronting now across the country, Mayor and Professor, what do you think the federal government should be doing to support the childcare industry and the caregiving industry, I'd say more broadly? And also I'd be curious about your reactions to what Jake has laid out as a plan going forward for a new administration.
Well, I can start. The care economy is something that I think we've really got to focus on. It's something near and dear to my heart because my mother was a care worker for most of her working life. She had a series of low-wage jobs in healthcare, nursing homes, mental health institutes, and in the last stages of her career, she was a home healthcare worker, really sitting with people and taking care of them in the final stages of their life. But she was never paid a fair rate. She never had benefits. So we launched a campaign here in Chicago just a few weeks back called Your Home is Somebody's Workplace, and really focusing on emphasizing the care workers, and particularly women of color. And we feature them in that story. But it's all about making sure that we recognize that we cannot move forward. We cannot rebuild our economy if we're continuing to leave people behind. And women of color in the care economy have been left behind far too long. Another thing that we did here in Chicago that I'm especially proud of is we passed what we call the Fair Work Week ordinance. And what it really boils down to is making sure that employers have an obligation to tell their workers at least 2 weeks in advance what their schedule is going to be. If you're somebody who is putting together multiple jobs to make ends meet, you need to know what your income stream is. You need to know if you're going to be working so you can depend upon that revenue. And we've made sure that at least as far as Chicago is concerned, we are focused on making sure that there is equity and fairness in the workplace for those workers who need it most. But a lot of what Jake has talked about really resonates with me. It's why I'm an adamant supporter of the Vice President and hopefully Vice President-elect Senator Kamala Harris, but really thinking about how we can, as governments, be a stimulus and not a drag on the economy. And if I may, I just want to touch upon one point that Steve made, which really made a lot of sense. You know, we are faced at the local level with supreme financial crises. And if we don't get help from the federal government, we have nothing but bad options. We're doing everything that we can to make sure that we deliver balanced budgets, that we do it in a way that doesn't abandon our values of equity and inclusion. But if we don't get help from the federal government, as I said, we have nothing but bad choices, including looking at layoffs and looking at furloughs. This is not the time for government to be putting people into an uncertain economy. We need to make sure that we do everything that we can, that we're prudent fiduciaries of taxpayer dollars. But the last thing that we should be doing is putting people into the unemployment ranks because we can't get help from the federal government for this once in a lifetime economic crisis. We need the federal government to help our help. We need to put aside the partisanship and make sure that we are building bridges to come together to help state and local governments shore up our economies. In a city like Chicago, where we are 80% of the economy for our state, we need to make sure that we can deal with the revenue losses that have flowed from the COVID economy. And that really requires a federal government who has more discretionary resources than any other level of government to step up and do their part.
Thanks.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I mean, I think I want to bolster what Mayor Lightfoot has said, and to add to that is, when people talk about the silent majority in America, I think, if you look at the silent majority of workers, it is care workers. It is usually women, women of color, specifically, people of color, and this has been a long-held, the basis of our economy, and one that is not measured properly. It's not paid properly, and there aren't enough protections, and a lot of that was because of specifically racial exclusions in the 1930s, where domestic workers and home workers were left out of some of these protections. And I think if we're looking at the economy of the future, granted, the climate disaster that is coming, granted how many industries have shifted, and the robotics and all of the automation that we're seeing, I think we have to consider care work as a foundational component of our economy going forward and reward it as such. And I think part of the reason it hasn't been rewarded because it is hard work. It is mentally difficult. It is physically difficult work. And if people were compensated based on how hard their work was, care workers would be the highest paid, and they're not. And I think part of that is because it has been female, it has been brown and black, and I think we really need to recognize that and change it, and change our economic metrics such that our GDP metrics and our economic metrics really take account of how much work is at the in-home, silent. There isn't a coalition, there isn't a union for care workers, and I think we really need to focus on that.
Thanks. Congressman, I wonder if we could turn to you. It seems to me that a lot of the, in some cases explicit, in some cases underlying threads of this conversation go to how important it is for us to strengthen as a country our social safety nets. And you have been a leading proponent of automatic stabilizers, that is for designing programs like unemployment insurance so that they can remain available until a certain lower employment rate, for example, is reached. Why do you think, Congressman, that this is the right moment to be pushing for this kind of design, and how do you think we are most likely to be able to achieve some of these ends that you've been advocating for some time?
Mara, I very much feel this is exactly the right moment. Back in January, when the stock market was 29,000 and our unemployment rate was an alleged 3.5%, we still had remarkable stresses in our society because of the unequal income and the unequal wealth. And 2 months later, the coronavirus hit, and all those things were accentuated and accelerated. Not only were the people at the bottom, the ones at risk, the care workers, et cetera, the ones who suffered the most. In fact, people in the top quarter saved an astonishing $3 trillion of money annualized in the second quarter. I mean, people like hopefully many on the call are doing fine. We're getting paid, we're working from home, we're paying down our credit card debt, and the people at the bottom are getting hammered. And they're also the ones that have to go to work, so they're also getting sick more often, they're dying more often. So I think the need is greater. And unfortunately too, coming out of this is going to take the bottom quartile much, much longer to recover than the people at the top. So this is the time to raise the minimum wage, to do expanded child care tax credit, to do a domestic workers bill of rights, which has been languishing in the Congress for some time, to do things like equalizing the tax on capital gains, and really trying to lift up those folks, dealing with the gig workers who have been really hammered by the COVID crisis, but they were getting hammered before because they weren't part of this. To look at guaranteed retirement. One of the things this, I think, COVID crisis has done is point out the really deep need to have health care for every American. I know President Biden will take us strongly in that right direction. had a sad conversation with my sister, a pediatrician, last night about the vicissitudes of working in a private equity space and trying to deliver healthcare, and how profit takes precedence over everything. There's much we can do. And one thing I'd just like to toss out too, as Jake looks at diverging wealth, is the Cory Booker's idea of baby bonds, which can be race neutral, but the people at the bottom have no chance to build the kind of wealth that people like my family were able to do over the years through home ownership. Richard Rothstein has written beautifully about how discrimination in federal housing loans has led to much of this wealth inequity.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Appreciate that. Steve, I'm going to turn to you in a minute. I just want to remind all of the folks out there in our audience that we are going to be taking your questions shortly. So please make sure, I see some of you have already, but submit questions you may have for our terrific panel here using the questions tab on the side of your screen. So just a little reminder on that. Steve, if I might turn to you, among the many things that this pandemic has brought into stark relief is clearly the significant challenges in the worker safety arena and the import of improving worker safety. We've seen several instances of organized labor pushing certainly in this direction over the past few months, but for a long period of time. What do you think the role of unions will be as we all figure out how to safely navigate work? And how would that change with a federal government that prioritizes people's safety and power in their workplace? Sadly, a priority that has been missing in recent years.
Well, we're certainly looking forward to working with an administration that does value work and workers, and that considers the safety of workers not just a luxury good, but something that's essential. I mean, it's ironic that Senator McConnell is insisting that it's safe for people to go back to work, yet he wants to eliminate any employer liability just in case things go wrong. So, you know, we seem to have our values upside down, right? So if we had sufficient OSHA protections in terms of designing workplaces properly, providing employees with the appropriate protective equipment, we would be far more able to open up our workplaces, open up the economy, and get back to work. Right now, I think we're all suffering from a crisis of confidence. I think former First Lady Obama put it well last night. If people did not get an opportunity to see her speech, they should review it. She didn't mean it necessarily personally against the current president, but she made it very clear, and I think most of us agree, that there's been a level of incompetence and inability to deal with the current crisis that is just alarming, considering who we think we are. We are the United States of America, yet we don't feel like we're acting like the United States of America any longer. And part of that is the disregard for workers. This is the kind of thing that we used to look at in third world nations and criticize, but yet we're engaging in that kind of conduct today. So we're very much looking forward to a Biden administration, because we know where his heart is. We know where his soul is. But going forward, it's not just about some of the things that Congressman Beyer and Jake have talked about, which is, providing, certain equitable income supports for people, a good minimum wage. We know a baseline is safety and health, but we have longstanding inequities that both of them have also referred to that can be addressed. And we have a tremendous opportunity to do that. But it starts with workers being able to speak for themselves. And that's organized labor. Even in the caregiving workforce, there is a union for caregivers. AFSCME is that union. We just organized 40,000 childcare providers in California in conjunction with our partners at SEIU. We represent home care workers, hundreds of thousands of them throughout the country, both AFSCME and SEIU. So we need to continue to bring representation rights to those workers so they can speak for themselves. Even where they have representation, we find that the wages are inadequate. Retirement benefits are not there. Social Security coverage is not even always extended to caregivers. These are basic things that we know President Biden's going to deal with. And with organized labor working in a partnership, we think we can do these things in a way that's both exciting for the workers, but better for America.
Thanks, Steve. Let me just ask one last question before we go to audience questions. And this one we could do as a lightning round. Whoever wants to jump in, see if we can get consensus or if there are a variety of views. Let's say we're 3 or 4 years from now. And let's say the nation's direction has shifted based on leadership that we have at the top. And we're implementing a lot of what we have discussed thus far in this conversation. What is the one thing, if you had to pick one thing that you would most like to see accomplished over this period, what would be your top item, the single most important thing? Who wants to start? Mayor, thank you.
I think one of the most important things for me in the city is making sure that we're building wealth in Black and brown communities. For far too long, our communities have been left out of economic progress, economic largesse. It helps build strong, healthy neighborhoods. It helps build safe neighborhoods and expands the populations in cities. So building Black and brown wealth is one of the primary areas that we are focused on in Chicago.
Thanks, Congressman. I think I saw your hand go up.
It fits in nicely with the mayor's piece, which is lifting children out of poverty. It's still incredibly embarrassing that the richest nation in the history of mankind has so many kids still worried about food insecurity, education insecurity, housing insecurity.
Thanks.
I think, I would just add to that if I could, because I do think that those are two key goals, and I think they fit under a broader rubric. And we've talked about it a little bit already today on the panel, is we do need to address income levels across the board in America, except for those maybe in the top quintile. But everybody else has been stagnant and suffering. It's been particularly bad for children. We have too many kids in poverty, as the congressman points out. And of course, we have a system that is almost designed to keep Black and brown people at unequal levels of income and deny them opportunities. And we can do all of that. I mean, we know how to get these things done. And I think the vice president's platform, a lot of it would get it done. And it's about empowering people to speak for themselves. It's about providing the kind of educational opportunities, and it's intentionally dismantling systemic racism that we know exists in our society. I think if we can do those things, we know how to do it. We have to be determined to get it done.
Thanks. Jake or Professor, would you like to chime in? Or
I'm going to continue the chain of building on what each person has said. I mean, it really fundamentally does come down to rebalancing where power lies in this country. Steve talked about worker power and investing in worker power so that workers are able to collectively bargain for wages and benefits and fair return for their hard work. But also the power of entrepreneurs. I talked about the vice president's view that giving access to capital and credit, particularly to Black and brown entrepreneurs, is such a central way of empowering them to drive job creation in this country. And then the power to working families to actually not be forced to be squeezed by stagnant wages and rising costs, but to be able to make choices that are best for them and their kids. And I think, that's a lot. That's not one thing, but I think thinking about the way in which we are empowering working people in this country and small businesses in this country will help lay the foundation for the kinds of outcomes that everyone has talked about over the course of this panel so far.
Thanks, Jake. And Professor, please.
My one thing was going to be exactly what Mayor Lightfoot said, which is to close the racial wealth gap. I think that is the number one thing that we have to do, but also an easy one. So I'm going to cheat and add one thing: day one, sort of postal banking, save the post office. And to create access points across the country in every community. So that's an easy one I think we could do tomorrow.
Thanks, and that's a obviously critical by the day and hour reference to the post office. So appreciate that from you. We have a number of terrific questions from our audience and very limited time here. So what I'm going to do is pick one that seems to combine what a number of people have been saying or asking about, and obviously follows on the conversation that we have been having thus far. I think you all hit on this in various ways, but let me just put the question that came from Joshua Enoch. Joshua asked, COVID has exposed that much of the recovery from the Great Recession was built on a foundation of low-wage, low-skilled jobs. What steps can be taken and policies enacted to create a more durable and equitable workforce that is less susceptible to shocks like a pandemic or natural disasters or climate change? So this may be a good question to end on, because I think it does tie together a lot of what we've been talking about. Mayor?
Well, I think that the questioner is 100% right. It's not like we didn't know that there were vulnerabilities in our country, our cities, and our states, but COVID has exposed them, and really they're flashing like a neon sign. I think one of the most important things that we can learn from this experience, aside from making sure that people have access to good quality healthcare, is to really think about how we can use this moment to build different kinds of economic opportunities all across our community. One example, we are using money that we received through the CARES Act to stand up a very robust contact tracing regime. We have intentionally made sure that we are focusing on hiring from those communities that have been hardest hit by the economic downturn, and building opportunities for people that maybe haven't had good paying jobs or have come out of circumstances that has left them economically destitute. And we're looking at this not just for the short term, but building a system of community healthcare workers who will be there and have job opportunities for the long term. That's just one example of, I think, what we can do to really think about the opportunities that this moment presents, and to bring people into the economy, to give them good paying jobs with benefits, and build that they can start to build a life on.
Thank you. Thank you. Very well put and laid out. Anyone else want to tackle?
I'll just add, do everything we can to strengthen the ability of workers to organize. And we've pushed, all of our laws have been pushing in the wrong direction. So let's help them do that, including things like participation in company boards. It destroys me when a company decides to leave a community without ever getting any input from the workers or the people in the community. And then also, let's think about adding guaranteed retirement accounts to Social Security, because more and more of our people are retiring with not enough money to live.
Thanks,
I also want to make, I want to kind of, as we say in the academy, problematize the word low-skilled or low-skilled workers, because I think, you know, one of the things we saw with essential workers is, you know, this traditionally quote-unquote low-skilled, and I just don't know what that means when we're talking about, you know, healthcare frontline workers, people who are in harm's way, care workers. I don't think that that's necessarily low-skilled. I think some of these jobs require a lot of skill, perhaps not the traditional types of skills that we tend to recognize, but I think that just the term can be used differently.
Thanks. Appreciate that underscoring, Professor. And as I expected, I've learned a tremendous amount from all of you. Really appreciate the time and energy and commitment of our panelists. I also want to thank everyone who's tuned in to listen today. Again, sorry we couldn't get to the many terrific questions that we had, but really thank you all for joining us. I do want to just let people know that a closed caption enabled recording of this event will be available later this afternoon at americanprogressaction.org/events. So if you want to spread the word and have other people catch up with it, that can happen there. And again, a big thanks to all of our panelists for your time, to Secretary Castro for his terrific keynote at the start of this, and thank you all. Look forward to the continuing conversations that we at CAP will be having for the rest of the week, and to everything else that's going on. Thank you.